What if I told you that one man owns more American soil than the entire state of Delaware? A private citizen with land holdings so vast that you could hide entire towns within them and nobody would ever know. John Malone, the cable cowboy, has quietly amassed 2.2 million acres across the United States, becoming America's largest private landowner. But what exactly happens behind the gates of these massive properties? Let's explore the mysteries and controversies surrounding America's most secretive land empire. There's something deeply American about owning land. It's woven into our national identity. But John Malone has taken this to an entirely different level. His 2.2 million acres span from the misty forests of Maine to the sun-baked ranches of New Mexico, creating a private kingdom larger than Yellowstone and Yosemite National Parks combined. Standing at the edge of one of Malone's New Mexico ranches, you can see nothing but rolling grasslands disappearing into the horizon. The vastness is disorienting, mile after mile of private property, controlled by one man with no public access. It's enough to make you wonder what could be happening in those remote corners that no one ever sees. The cable cowboys rise to land barren. John Malone made his fortune in the cable television industry, earning the nickname Cable Cowboy for his aggressive business tactics in the 1970s and 80s. As CEO of TCI, Malone revolutionized the cable industry, eventually selling to AT&T for $48 billion in 1999. This windfall allowed him to pursue his true passion, acquiring vast tracts of American soil. His first major acquisition was the 290,000-acre Bell Ranch in New Mexico in 2010, but that was just the beginning. Soon after, he purchased the 290,100-acre Silver Spur Ranch in Wyoming, followed by massive timberlands in Maine and cattle operations in Colorado. What drives a man to acquire so much land? Malone himself has said it's partly about conservation, partly about cattle operations, and partly about having a legacy that outlasts him. But critics wonder if there's more to the story. After all, when you own more land than some small countries, questions naturally arise. The mysterious Bell Ranch. One of Malone's most intriguing properties is the historic Bell Ranch in New Mexico. Spanning nearly 300,000 acres, this property is larger than New York City and Chicago combined. Its boundaries encompass mountains, canyons, grasslands, and over 25 miles of the Canadian River. What makes the Bell Ranch particularly interesting is its extreme isolation. The nearest town of any size is nearly an hour's drive away. Cell phone coverage is spotty at best. Satellite imagery shows vast stretches where there are no roads at all, just wilderness accessible only by horseback or specialized vehicles. Local rancher Jim Hendricks describes the property. That place has corners nobody's set foot in for years. There are canyons and hideaways where you could build a small town, and unless someone was specifically looking for it, they'd never find it. Malone's ranch managers control who enters and exits. They decide what activities take place there, and they determine who, if anyone, gets to see what's happening in the interior. The invisible workforce. Across Malone's 2.2 million acres, hundreds of ranch hands, managers, security personnel, and maintenance workers form what amounts to a private government. Former Bell Ranch employee Mike Ramirez describes the experience. Working on a property that size, you're in your own world. Some ranch hands go weeks without seeing anyone from outside. You have your own rules, your own way of doing things. It's like being in a different country. These workers often live in company housing on the properties, shop at company stores, and use company vehicles. Their lives are completely intertwined with the ranch operations, creating a level of dependence rarely seen in modern employment. Security on these properties is handled privately, with little oversight from local law enforcement. Former ranch security guard James Peterson explains, "We had our own protocols for handling trespassers. Local sheriff's deputies might be hours away, so we dealt with most situations ourselves. There was an understanding that what happened on the ranch stayed on the ranch." The hidden value of remote land. Remote ranch land has a long history as a hiding place in America. During Prohibition, remote farms housed illegal distilleries. In the 1970s, thousands of acres of national forests concealed massive marijuana-growing operations. More recently, law enforcement has discovered illegal drug labs hidden on remote properties throughout the rural West. In 2019, authorities in Colorado uncovered one of the largest illegal marijuana growing operations in state history, hidden on a remote 400-acre ranch. The operation had been running for years, completely undetected despite regular aerial surveillance. There is no evidence whatsoever that John Malone's properties are involved in any illegal activities. But his land holdings raise an important question. How do we monitor what happens on private properties so vast that you could hide entire operations within them? Former DEA agent Robert Thompson explains, "When you're dealing with properties that span hundreds of thousands of acres, complete surveillance becomes practically impossible. You could have dozens of people living and working in the interior, and unless you had specific intelligence leading you there, you'd never know they existed." The Maine Timberlands mystery. While Malone's western ranches get most of the attention, his most mysterious holdings might be the vast timberlands he owns in Maine. In 2011, he purchased 1 million acres of Maine forest. That's 5% of the entire state, making him the largest private landowner in Maine's history. These aren't just any forests. They're some of the most remote wilderness areas in the eastern United States, filled with hidden lakes, abandoned logging camps, and terrain so rugged that parts of it have rarely been explored. Local guides tell stories of stumbling across old cabins deep in these woods that don't appear on any maps. The history of Maine's North Woods is filled with tales of hidden activities. During Prohibition, the remote border with Canada made it a hotbed for rum running. In the 1970s and 80s, some of the largest marijuana-growing operations in New England were discovered hidden deep in these same forests. Local historian Margaret Simmons explains, "These woods have always had secrets. The vastness and isolation make them perfect for anyone wanting to disappear or conduct activities away from prying eyes. That's been true since colonial times." The underground water empire. Beneath the surface of Malone's land empire lies something potentially more valuable than the land itself: massive aquifers containing billions of gallons of increasingly precious groundwater. In states like New Mexico and Colorado, where Malone owns some of his largest ranches, control of these underground water resources translates to extraordinary power. Hydrogeologist Dr. Sarah Thompson explains, "When you own the land above an aquifer, you typically have rights to the water beneath it. With properties this size, you're essentially controlling underground reservoirs that could supply entire cities." The value of these water rights has skyrocketed in recent years as climate change and population growth strain Western water supplies. Some water rights experts estimate that the water beneath Malone's western ranches could be worth more than the land itself, potentially billions of dollars. The water rights power play. Perhaps the most concerning aspect of Malone's land empire isn't what might be hidden on the properties, but what's being controlled openly: water. In the American West, water rights are often more valuable than the land itself. By acquiring massive ranches, Malone has also acquired the water rights that come with them, giving him extraordinary control over this precious resource. Water attorney Sarah Jenkins explains, "When you own the water rights to major streams and aquifers in the arid West, you essentially control the future development of entire regions. It's a power that goes beyond just owning land." In New Mexico and Colorado, some of Malone's properties control the headwaters of rivers that supply water to downstream communities and farms. While water rights are regulated by state law, the sheer scale of his holdings gives him unprecedented influence over regional water policies. Local rancher Tom Martinez describes the impact. "My family has ranched here for 5 generations, but we're downstream from one of Malone's big properties. If he decided to maximize his water usage, it could put us out of business overnight. That's a lot of power for one man to have. The political influence. With land holdings spanning multiple states, Malone's empire gives him extraordinary political influence in rural America. His properties often represent the largest tax base in sparsely populated counties, making local governments highly sensitive to his interests and concerns. In Liberty County, New Mexico, Malone's Bell Ranch accounts for nearly 20% of the county's total land area and is its largest taxpayer. County Commissioner Robert Jackson describes the dynamic. When your county's budget depends heavily on one property owner, it inevitably affects decision-making. There's always awareness that policies that might displease that landowner could have serious consequences for county finances. This influence extends to state politics as well. In states like Maine, Colorado, and New Mexico, where Malone owns significant properties, his representatives regularly engage with legislators on issues ranging from property taxes to environmental regulations. Campaign finance records show donations to key politicians in positions to influence policies affecting his land holdings. The conservation controversy. One of the most contentious aspects of Malone's land empire involves conservation easements. These legal arrangements allow landowners to receive significant tax benefits by promising never to develop their property. Malone has placed conservation easements on substantial portions of his holdings, generating both praise from environmentalists and criticism from tax watchdogs. Conservation advocate Ellen Richardson praises Malone's approach. He's ensuring that some of America's most beautiful landscapes will remain undeveloped forever. That's a tremendous legacy that benefits wildlife, water quality, and future generations. But tax policy expert James Thornton sees it differently. Conservation easements can be abused as tax shelters for the ultra-wealthy. When billionaires place easements on land they never intended to develop anyway, taxpayers essentially subsidize their private kingdoms while getting limited public benefit in return. The controversy deepens when you consider that many of Malone's properties remain completely closed to public access, despite the tax benefits he receives. Unlike conservation easements donated to national parks or wildlife refuges, most of Malone's preserved lands remain behind locked gates, visible only to him and his invited guests. The hunting grounds mystery. Some of Malone's most remote properties have become exclusive hunting reserves, catering to wealthy clients willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars for the opportunity to hunt trophy elk, deer, and other game. These hunting operations add another layer of mystery to what happens behind the ranch gates. Former hunting guide James Peterson describes these operations. These aren't your typical hunting trips. We're talking about ultra-wealthy clients flown in on private jets, staying in luxury lodges hidden deep within the property. They expect complete privacy and are willing to pay enormous sums for it. The exclusivity of these hunting reserves raises questions about wildlife management and fair access to game animals. In many states, wildlife is legally considered a public resource, even when it resides on private land. But on properties, this vast, effective oversight of hunting practices becomes nearly impossible. Wildlife biologist Dr. Thomas Wilson explains the concern. When you have hunting operations on properties this size, state game wardens have very limited ability to monitor harvests or ensure compliance with regulations. The landowner essentially becomes the de facto wildlife manager for enormous territories. Local hunters describe frustration with being excluded from areas their families hunted for generations before Malone's acquisitions. Hunter Mike Ramirez notes, "My grandfather used to hunt those mountains, but now they're behind locked gates. All the best habitat is reserved for people who can pay $20,000 for a guided hunt." The land grab criticism. Malone's acquisition strategy has faced criticism from those who see it as part of a troubling trend, the increasing concentration of American land in the hands of a few ultra-wealthy individuals. Critics have labeled it a modern land grab that echoes the robber baron era of the late 19th century. Rural sociologist Dr. Emily Harrington explains, When billionaires buy up huge swaths of rural America, it drives up land prices beyond what working ranchers and farmers can afford. It changes the character of rural communities and concentrates control of natural resources in fewer and fewer hands. This criticism intensified when Malone purchased the historic Bell Ranch in New Mexico. Local ranching families who had hoped to buy portions of the property found themselves outbid by Malone's virtually unlimited resources. Some had been leasing grazing land on the ranch for generations, only to face uncertainty when ownership changed hands. The development battles. Despite his conservation rhetoric, Malone has been involved in numerous battles over development rights on and around his properties. These conflicts reveal the complex reality behind the public image of the conservation-minded land baron. In Colorado's Eagle County, Malone fought for years to develop portions of his 4,000-acre ranch near Vail. Local zoning regulations limited development to one house per 35 acres, but Malone sought exceptions that would allow more intensive building. The dispute dragged on for nearly a decade, with local residents opposing what they saw as special treatment for a billionaire landowner. Similar conflicts have emerged in Maine, where conservation groups criticized Malone's timber management practices on his million-acre holdings. While parts of the property were placed under conservation easements, other sections continued to see intensive logging operations that some environmentalists claimed were inconsistent with sustainable forestry. The surveillance challenge. How do you monitor 2.2 million acres of private land? This question challenges law enforcement, environmental regulators, and tax authorities alike. The practical reality is that much of what happens on Malone's properties remains invisible to outside scrutiny. Traditional law enforcement surveillance methods become almost useless at this scale. Even with aerial monitoring, the vastness makes comprehensive coverage impossible. Satellite imagery provides only periodic snapshots, often not detailed enough to identify specific activities. Former FBI agent Thomas Wilson describes the challenge. With properties this size, you're looking for needles in a haystack the size of Rhode Island. Unless you have specific intelligence directing you where to look, effective surveillance is practically impossible. This surveillance gap creates a troubling reality. On America's largest private properties, activities can occur with minimal risk of detection or oversight. It's a level of privacy and autonomy that exists nowhere else in our highly monitored modern society. The borderlands. Some of Malone's most intriguing properties lie along America's international borders. In Maine, his Timberlands share a 62-mile border with Canada. In New Mexico, some of his ranches are within the 100-mile border zone with Mexico. These border-adjacent properties exist in a unique legal and security context. Border security expert Richard Thompson explains, "Private land along international borders creates unique challenges for law enforcement. Border Patrol has certain rights to access private property within the border zone, but monitoring and patrolling hundreds of thousands of acres effectively is practically impossible." These border properties have historically been areas of concern for illegal crossings and smuggling activities. The remote nature of these lands, combined with their vast size, makes them difficult to secure even with modern surveillance technology. The security question. The security implications of such vast private landholdings raise eyebrows among national security experts. With properties spanning international borders and encompassing critical infrastructure, Malone's land empire exists in a regulatory gray area that few have considered. Some of Malone's properties contain critical infrastructure: high-voltage transmission lines, oil and gas pipelines, communications towers, and water resources that serve surrounding communities frequently cross these massive ranches. This raises questions about who controls access to this infrastructure and how it's protected. Security consultant Jennifer Adams notes, "On public lands, there are clear protocols for monitoring and protecting infrastructure. But on private properties this size, access is controlled entirely by the landowner. That creates potential vulnerabilities that our regulatory system wasn't designed to address." The tax haven ranches. Through sophisticated use of agricultural exemptions, conservation easements, and depreciation strategies, these properties can function as highly effective tax shelters. Tax policy expert Jennifer Williams explains. Agricultural property enjoys special tax treatment in most states. When combined with conservation easements and business deductions, it's possible for billionaires to pay effectively zero property tax on enormous holdings while simultaneously generating significant income tax deductions. In many counties, Malone's properties are taxed at agricultural rates, despite their potential value for development or resources. This classification can reduce property tax bills by 90% or more compared to market rate taxation. Local tax assessor Maria Rodriguez notes the impact on communities. When the largest properties in the county are taxed at pennies on the dollar compared to their actual value, it shifts the tax burden to smaller landowners and homeowners. Everyone else pays more because these massive ranches pay less. The future of Malone's land empire. What will happen to Malone's 2.2 million acres after he's gone? This question looms large over the future of these vast territories. Now in his 80s, Malone has been increasingly focused on the legacy of his land holdings. Some properties have been placed in complex trust arrangements designed to keep them intact for generations. Others have conservation easements that permanently restrict development regardless of future ownership. But the sheer scale of his holdings makes their long-term fate uncertain. Estate planning expert William Davidson offers this perspective. The tax implications of transferring 2.2 million acres of prime American real estate are staggering. Without careful planning, his heirs could be forced to sell significant portions just to pay the estate taxes. Perhaps that's for the best. The concentration of so much land in one person's hands raises fundamental questions about power, resources, and access that go to the heart of American values. As the sun sets over John Malone's vast 2.2 million acres, we're left wondering what truly happens behind those locked gates. His land empire represents both American ambition and troubling questions about resource control. Whether you see it as a conservation triumph or modern feudalism, one thing's certain: some secrets of America's largest private kingdom may forever remain hidden. If you found this fascinating, subscribe now and see you in the next one.